What if the key to true success wasn't more money, but more meaning? Imagine being a millionaire, having everything, but still feeling empty inside. Stay tuned to find out how one simple challenge changed everything for a man who thought he had it all. This story will leave you questioning everything you know about wealth and happiness. Victor Matthews, the epitome of success, sat in his grand office overlooking the city skyline. His office, adorned with modern artwork, polished furniture, and walls lined with accolades, reflected the life he had built for himself, a self-made millionaire. He had climbed the corporate ladder with sharp intellect and a relentless drive to succeed. People admired him, envied him, and many even feared him. But despite all his material wealth, there was an emptiness he couldn't shake, an emptiness he couldn't quite put his finger on. Every day, Victor walked through the halls of his mansion, but he never truly saw the world around him. His interactions were transactional, his relationships shallow. He had surrounded himself with luxury designer suits, expensive watches, and the best of everything, but none of these things seemed to bring him happiness. He spent most of his time in meetings, working tirelessly to expand his empire. But every night, as he lay awake in bed, something gnawed at him. He felt disconnected from life itself, as if the pursuit of wealth had dulled his senses and numbed his heart. It was on one of those ordinary afternoons, when Victor had just finished a long business call, that he overheard Maria, the maid who had worked for him for years, speaking to a visitor in fluent Spanish. The tone of her voice was calm, yet her words held a kind of grace and confidence that caught Victor's attention. She was not the type of person he usually paid attention to, but something about the way she spoke made him pause. Victor, always eager to assert his superiority, saw an opportunity. He decided to test Maria, to put her knowledge to the test. He thought it would be a simple game, a quick challenge he could win easily. After all, she was just a maid, and he was a man of wealth and power. With a sly grin on his face, he approached her. "Maria," Victor said, his voice laced with arrogance, "I overheard you speaking Spanish. I have a challenge for you. If you can translate this note for me, I'll pay you my salary for an entire month. If you can't, I'll have no choice but to let you go. No more job, no more paycheck. How's that?" Maria, taken aback by the sudden challenge, met Victor's gaze. She had always respected him, but she had never been one to back down from a challenge. Her hands, though small, had spent years polishing the floors and cleaning the rooms of Victor's mansion. But her mind was far sharper than he ever gave her credit for. She knew that beneath his arrogant exterior, Victor was a man desperately searching for something beyond money, beyond power. Victor handed her a small slip of paper, written in a language he didn't recognize. It was a note he had found on his recent business trip, scribbled in a foreign dialect. He handed it over confidently, knowing that this simple task would prove his superiority. "Translate this for me," he ordered, his tone dismissive. Maria glanced at the note, her mind instantly recognizing the language. It was an ancient dialect of Spanish, rich with cultural nuances and hidden meanings. She had learned it as a child, growing up in a small town where the older generation still spoke it in daily life. She smiled to herself, realizing that this challenge, seemingly trivial, would be her opportunity to show Victor something he had overlooked: the power of wisdom, humility, and knowledge. Taking a deep breath, she began to read the note silently. It was not just a simple translation, it was a message, a deeply philosophical statement about the essence of life. As she read, Maria understood that the message was about more than words. It was about connection, humanity, and the value of compassion in a world that often prioritizes material success. It spoke of the importance of slowing down, of listening, of truly seeing the people around you not just as servants or employees, but as human beings deserving of respect. Victor stood there, watching her, eager to see her falter. But as he waited, something unexpected happened. Maria did not hesitate. She began to speak, translating the words with clarity and conviction, breathing life into the message. She spoke about the importance of kindness, of valuing people over possessions, and of the universal truth that wealth alone cannot bring happiness. The more she translated, the more Victor's confident facade began to crack. As Maria's words filled the room, something stirred within Victor, something he hadn't felt in years. It was as if the note was a mirror, reflecting not just the message of the past, but his own life. The realization struck him hard. No amount of wealth or power could ever replace the deeper meaning of life that Maria seemed to understand so effortlessly. Victor Matthews, the millionaire who had built his empire on ambition and dominance, stood frozen, caught in a moment of profound self-awareness. The challenge he had set for Maria had turned into a challenge for himself, one that would force him to confront everything he thought he knew about success, happiness, and human connection. Victor stood in the corner of the room, watching Maria with growing impatience. His mind was focused on the challenge he had set for her, convinced that this task would be just another easy victory. After all, he had been to the best schools, surrounded himself with the brightest minds, and had an entire team of translators at his disposal. He was confident that Maria, a maid with no formal education, would struggle with the foreign note. But as Maria began to read the words, Victor felt a strange unease creeping up. She didn't hesitate, didn't falter. Her eyes moved across the paper with a calm determination, as though she had encountered words like these before. Though Victor had never heard her speak anything other than basic Spanish and English, she took a moment to absorb the message, not simply reading but interpreting its meaning. The foreign text was complex, filled with layers of metaphor and wisdom that required more than just a word-for-word translation. It spoke of universal truths, lessons learned through hardship, and the fleeting nature of time and wealth. Victor had no idea what it said, but he could sense that it was powerful, perhaps even life-changing. Maria paused for a moment and looked up at Victor. There was a quiet confidence in her eyes, something that startled him. She wasn't nervous, nor did she seem worried about the consequences of failure. Instead, she simply began to speak. "The translation is not just about the words," she began, her voice steady and clear. "It's about the message behind them." Victor raised an eyebrow. He wasn't prepared for this kind of response. He expected her to stumble over the words or perhaps ask for clarification. Instead, Maria had taken control of the situation. Her voice flowed, and with every word, Victor found himself hanging on her every sentence. Maria began to translate, but it wasn't the cold, lifeless translation he had anticipated. She breathed life into each phrase, carefully interpreting the message rather than just providing a literal version of the words. She spoke of a person who, despite being rich in wealth, was poor in soul. The note, written by an anonymous philosopher, told the story of a man who spent his life accumulating riches but neglected the people around him, losing his happiness and his humanity in the process. "A person can fill their vaults with gold," Maria translated, "but if their heart is empty, then what value does it have?" Victor was taken aback. The simplicity of the phrase hit him like a punch to the gut. He had spent years building his fortune, investing in properties and stocks, accumulating more and more, but was he truly happy? Did his wealth bring him any closer to the kind of fulfillment he truly sought? Maria continued, her words painting a vivid picture in Victor's mind. She spoke about a deep and universal truth that true wealth was not measured by the amount of money in one's bank account, but by the richness of relationships, the depth of compassion, and the ability to contribute to the greater good. "It is not the treasure you possess that defines you," Maria translated, "but the legacy you leave behind." Victor felt a strange sensation wash over him. The words seemed to echo in his mind, reverberating through his thoughts. For the first time in years, he began to question the very foundation of his life. Was all his hard work, all his sacrifice, worth it if it came at the cost of everything else? Was this how he wanted to be remembered, as a man who lived for the next big deal, the next acquisition, or the next business venture? Maria's translation was more than just words. It was a mirror reflecting the man Victor had become. Her words pierced through his armor of arrogance and pride, exposing the raw vulnerability he had spent so long hiding. It was a realization that left him in stunned silence. As she continued, Maria didn't rush through the translation. She took her time, carefully selecting her words, making sure to honor the meaning of the original text while also infusing it with her own understanding. She spoke about the transient nature of wealth and the importance of gratitude, something Victor hadn't felt in a long time. His life, filled with achievements and accolades, had left little room for the simple joys of human connection. He had become so absorbed in his world of deals and investments that he had forgotten the most important lesson, that true success wasn't about how much you had, but about how much you gave. By the time Maria finished, Victor was no longer standing with arrogance or smugness. He was standing in awe. His heart, for the first time in years, was open. Maria had translated more than just the text. She had translated a soul. The realization hit him hard. His life was out of balance. He had focused so much on amassing wealth that he had neglected the very things that could make him truly rich. Maria set the note down and looked at Victor. Her work was done. She wasn't asking for anything more than what she had already received: a simple challenge, a simple test. But Victor, though speechless, knew that what she had given him was priceless. It wasn't just the translation, it was the awakening to a truth he had long ignored. In the silence that followed, Victor felt a shift deep inside him. The challenge he had set for Maria had been about more than just words. It had been about revealing the emptiness in his life. And in that moment, as he looked at Maria, he realized that the richness he had been seeking all along wasn't found in bank statements or business deals. It was found in moments like this, moments of genuine connection, humility, and understanding. Victor stood there, utterly still, as Maria's last words lingered in the air. The grand, polished walls of his office seemed to close in around him. The usual hum of his business empire, the sound of money flowing and deals being sealed, suddenly felt distant and insignificant. His heart raced, but not with the usual excitement of triumph. Instead, it was filled with an overwhelming sense of guilt, a guilt he had never allowed himself to feel before. Maria's words had pierced through the walls he had so carefully constructed around his emotions, revealing a vulnerability he had long buried. As she spoke, he had not only heard the message of the note, but he had also heard something deeper, the reflection of his own life. She had translated not just the words, but his very soul. Victor's mind raced back through the years. His entire life had been a quest for power, for status, for material success. From a young age, he had been taught that only the strongest survived, that the world was a battlefield where only the richest and most ruthless emerged victorious. Every decision he had made had been centered around building his wealth, his brand, and his reputation. He had always believed that happiness would follow when he reached the pinnacle of success. But now, as he stood there, he realized that had been wrong all along. The mansion around him, the expensive suits he wore, the elite circles he frequented, none of it had brought him the peace or fulfillment he had expected. Instead, it had distanced him from the very things that gave life meaning, connection, kindness, and the ability to make a positive impact on others. In his pursuit of wealth, he had lost sight of the things that truly mattered. He had overlooked the people who had helped him along the way, and worse, he had taken them for granted. He had neglected the simple joys of life, the ones that Maria had shown him in her quiet, humble way. Victor looked at Maria, standing there with a serene expression, waiting for him to respond. He had seen her countless times before, but now, for the first time, he truly saw her. Maria was not just a maid, she was a woman who had worked tirelessly, quietly, without ever seeking recognition or reward. She had lived a life rooted in values that Victor had discarded long ago: humility, empathy, and a genuine desire to serve others. Her simple yet profound translation had made Victor confront the life he had been living. He was no longer the man who stood tall, untouchable, surrounded by the luxuries of his empire. In that moment, he was just a man who realized how empty his success had made him feel. The very thing he had worked so hard for, money, power, and influence, had left him feeling isolated and disconnected. He had spent so much time focusing on what he could acquire that he had never considered what he could give, how he could contribute to the world, or how he could truly connect with others. Victor's mind began to clear as the weight of his realization sank in. He thought about the people he had dismissed over the years, his employees, the workers who had built his empire, and even the people who had simply tried to help him along the way. How many times had he ignored their efforts? How many times had he taken credit for the success of his company without acknowledging the team that had supported him? He had viewed them as mere tools to achieve his own goals, rather than as individuals, with their own stories, struggles, and dreams. The realization was humbling, and it left him feeling exposed, vulnerable. He had spent so many years building walls around himself, protecting his ego, that he had never allowed anyone to truly reach him. Maria's quiet wisdom had shattered those walls in an instant. But there was another, deeper realization. Victor understood now that true wealth was not about the numbers in his bank account or the properties he owned. True wealth was the legacy he would leave behind, the relationships he nurtured, the lives he touched, and the positive impact he made on the world. What was the point of amassing all this wealth if he couldn't share it, if he couldn't use it to create something meaningful? What was the point of living a life that was centered solely on himself? As Victor's thoughts swirled, Maria spoke, again, this time gently. "You've always had the power to change things, Victor. You've always had the power to make a difference, but change doesn't come from how much you own, it comes from how much you give." Her words hung in the air, and Victor realized they weren't just words, they were a truth that had been staring him in the face all along. He had the power to change the world, not by accumulating more, but by giving more. He could choose to be a force for good, to use his wealth and influence to help others, to inspire those around him, and to leave a legacy that would be remembered for the right reasons. Victor swallowed hard. The weight of the decision ahead of him was immense, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. He realized that he could be more than just the wealthy businessman he had always been. He could be a man who used his resources for good, who gave back to the community, who valued people over profits. He turned to Maria, his eyes filled with newfound respect. "Maria," he said, his voice soft but filled with sincerity, "you've shown me something today that I've been blind to for years. I've lived my life thinking that money would bring me happiness. But I now see that the true measure of success is how you treat others and how you live your life with purpose. I don't know where this journey will take me, but I know it starts. Now thank you." Maria, ever humble, nodded. "You've already started, Victor. The journey is always in the choices you make." And in that moment, Victor Matthews, the millionaire businessman, realized that his real transformation had only just begun. Victor, still grappling with the profound realization that had shifted his entire perspective on life, stood in the midst of his grand office, the silence hanging heavy between him and Maria. The weight of what he had just learned settled deep within him, and for the first time he felt a true sense of clarity. But as with all moments of great epiphany, this step was never clear-cut. How could he go from this moment of realization to making real, lasting change? How could he turn his newfound understanding into action? Victor knew he had to do something. But what? What could he offer Maria for the incredible impact her words had on him? How could he show her the gratitude he felt for the lesson she had, unknowingly, imparted? His mind began to race, considering all sorts of options. He thought of giving her a raise, something simple, something transactional. But that didn't seem to honor the depth of the moment. A raise, though appreciated, would not be enough to express the enormity of what he had just realized. He needed to offer something more than money, something that would reflect the profound shift he was experiencing. "Maria," Victor said, his voice now softer, almost humbled. "You've taught me something today, something that has changed my life. I can't just pay you for what you've done, because this goes beyond money, but I want to make sure you're compensated for the way you've impacted my world." Maria glanced up at him, not surprised, but with the same quiet demeanor she had always shown. She was used to Victor's gestures of wealth and generosity, but something in the way he said those words made her pause. His tone was different, almost vulnerable. "Victor," she said gently, "I've worked for you for many years, and I've never asked for anything beyond what I've earned. But the truth is, I don't need money to feel appreciated. What I've done is not about what I can get from you, but what I can give. I don't need anything more than the peace I've found in doing my work with purpose." Her words were humble, but they resonated deeply with Victor. She wasn't asking for more. She wasn't after recognition or reward. She had worked tirelessly, not for wealth or status, but simply because it aligned with her values, her desire to serve others. Victor had expected Maria to accept his offer, even though he had just realized that the greatest value in life wasn't in the wealth he had accumulated. But in that moment, Maria's response stirred something new within him, a realization that, despite his generosity and power, he had been missing the most important lesson of all, the importance of selflessness. She had no interest in what he could give her, only in what she could offer the world. Victor looked at her with admiration and respect. This woman, who he had long seen as little more than a servant, was now teaching him the essence of life he had never truly understood. She had no need for his money, no need for recognition, and yet her wisdom had altered his life in ways he could never repay. The true twist of the situation wasn't just that Maria had translated words on a page. The real twist lay in the fact that she had unwittingly helped Victor realize something far more profound. His purpose in life had been misdirected. He had spent so many years accumulating wealth and seeking external validation, only to realize that his heart had been searching for something more meaningful all along. In that search for purpose, he had overlooked the simplest, most powerful truths. Maria's response humbled Victor even further. It was clear that she had no desire for material wealth, for titles, or recognition. Her work, her life, was a reflection of deep internal peace and purpose. That, Victor now understood, was the true source of contentment. As he stood there, contemplating her words, Victor came to another conclusion. He could not offer Maria what she truly wanted. What she had given him was a gift far more valuable than any amount of money, and in turn, he needed to do something more meaningful than simply increase her pay. And so, Victor's thoughts shifted from monetary compensation to something much more substantial. His entire life had been built on the principles of power and influence, but Maria's lesson had shown him that real power lay in the ability to influence change in others, not just with wealth or status, but with kindness, understanding, and service. "I understand now," Victor said slowly, his voice full of conviction. "It's not about the money. It's about making a real difference. I've been so focused on acquiring, I've forgotten what it means to give. I've forgotten the value of true service, of lifting others up, not for personal gain, but for the greater good." Maria, ever humbled, smiled softly at him. "You're already on your way, Victor. The fact that you see this now is the first step. The world needs more people who lead with their hearts, not just their wallets." Victor nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. What if he could use his wealth, not to build a bigger empire for himself, but to build something that could genuinely improve the lives of others? What if he could create a foundation, an initiative that would help those in need? Something that Maria's lessons had awakened in him. He could fund education for underprivileged children, provide resources for the elderly, or invest in community projects that created real, lasting change. But it wasn't just about creating another charitable organization. It was about leading by example, inspiring those around him to adopt a similar mindset. Victor's journey had only just begun, but it had taken a pivotal turn. He wasn't going to be the millionaire businessman who spent his days focused on profit margins and stock prices. He was going to be a man who used his power, his influence, and his resources to make the world a better place. "I don't know exactly where this path will take me," Victor said, his voice steady with newfound purpose, "but I know I'm ready to start it, and I want to help others walk this path too. I'll use my position, my wealth, and my influence to serve others, to give back. It's time to start creating something that really matters." Maria nodded, a quiet pride in her eyes. She had done more than just translate words that day. She had helped to guide a man toward a better, more meaningful life. As Victor stood there, with a renewed sense of purpose, he knew the journey ahead would be difficult, but it would also be the most rewarding one he would ever undertake. His story was no longer about the pursuit of riches. It was about the pursuit of something far greater, the pursuit of meaning, purpose, and service. Victor Matthews stood in his mansion, looking out over the sprawling city below, yet the view that had once filled him with pride now seemed distant. The glittering lights of the city, the vastness of his empire, all felt meaningless compared to the profound shift that had occurred within him. The realization that wealth, power, and status couldn't fill the emptiness inside him was something he had never truly understood until now. But now, as the night unfolded, he knew that his life was about to take a completely different turn. Victor had always prided himself on his ability to control every situation, to maintain power in any conversation or transaction. He had built his fortune through sheer determination and intellect, and for years he had lived by the belief that success was measured by what you could own, how much you could acquire, and how much influence you could wield. But none of it had brought him the peace, the fulfillment, or the sense of purpose that Maria had unknowingly introduced into his life. Maria had shown him a different way. Through her quiet humility and the deep wisdom she embodied, she had illuminated a path for him, a path that was no longer about taking but about giving. She had given him more than just a translation of words. She had translated the very essence of life, reminding him that true wealth was found not in material possessions but in human connection, in kindness, and in the legacy you leave behind. The next morning, after a sleepless night spent in reflection, Victor made a decision. He would no longer focus on expanding his wealth for the sake of personal gain. Instead, he would use his fortune and influence to give back, to invest in causes and communities that needed it most. He would focus on making a real difference in the lives of others, using his business acumen and resources to foster positive change. The first step was simple. Victor scheduled a meeting with his board members and senior executives, a group he had always seen as crucial to maintaining his empire. He wasn't sure what the reaction would be. Any of them were used to Victor's cutthroat approach to business, but this time, he wasn't interested in profit margins or growth charts. He was focused on something entirely different, the greater good. When the meeting began, Victor surprised them all. He didn't start by discussing the next big deal or upcoming acquisition. Instead, he talked about his new vision. He shared his reflections on how his life had been consumed by the pursuit of success, and how, in doing so, he had lost sight of what truly mattered. He admitted that he had been blind to the importance of giving back, of contributing to society, in meaningful ways. "I've spent my life focused on building an empire," he said, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "But now, I realize that true success isn't about how much I can acquire, but about what I can contribute. I want to create something more than just wealth. I want to leave behind a legacy that will make a real difference in people's lives, and I need your help to do it." The room was silent. His team, who had always seen Victor as a fierce, ambitious leader, was unsure of how to react. Some exchanged confused glances, others looked skeptical, but Victor wasn't deterred. He knew the path he was on was the right one. This wasn't about their approval, it was about him taking ownership of his own transformation. "We're going to start investing in education, healthcare, and community building initiatives," he continued. "We'll create scholarships for underprivileged students, fund healthcare programs in neglected areas, and develop community spaces where people can come together and support each other. We'll use our wealth not to create more for ourselves, but to give more to those who need it most." Victor's vision wasn't just about writing checks or making charitable donations. It was about using his company's vast resources to implement lasting, tangible change. He wanted to create a movement, one that would inspire others in his industry and beyond to think differently about success. He didn't want to just be a man who amassed wealth. He wanted to be a man who transformed lives. But it wasn't just about the business world. Victor began to shift his personal life as well. He became more involved in local communities, offering mentorship to young entrepreneurs who shared his passion for making a positive impact. He also started organizing charity events and fundraising initiatives that focused on empowering marginalized groups and providing them with the tools they needed to succeed. In his personal relationships, Victor became more present, more mindful of the people around him. He made a conscious effort to listen, to engage with others not as a businessman, but as a human being. He reconnected with old friends, rebuilt strained relationships, and focused on building deeper, more meaningful connections. He realized that wealth, no matter how great, could never replace the joy and fulfillment that came from truly caring for others and being cared for in return. Maria continued to work in the mansion, as quiet and humble as ever. She watched Victor's transformation with a sense of quiet pride. She never sought praise, nor did she expect anything in return for the wisdom she had shared. She had simply spoken her truth, and in doing so, had opened Victor's eyes to a new world, one that was no longer defined by the size of his bank account but by the size of his heart. One evening, a few months after his initial realization, Victor invited Maria to dinner. It was a modest affair, no extravagant dishes, no expensive wine, just a simple meal in his private dining room. As they sat across from one another, Victor looked at her with gratitude. "Maria, I don't think I'll ever be able to fully thank you for what you've done for me," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Your words, your actions, they've changed my life. You've shown me a way to live with purpose, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to honor that lesson." Maria smiled, the same quiet smile she had worn for years. "You've always had it in you, Victor. You just needed to see it for yourself." Victor nodded, a feeling of peace washing over him. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was truly on the right path, one that was not about accumulating wealth or climbing higher, but about giving more, connecting more, and making a real impact. And so, Victor Matthews, once the embodiment of wealth and success, became something entirely different, a man who lived with purpose, who sought to make the world a better place, and who understood that the real measure of success wasn't found in the size of your bank account but in the legacy you leave behind and the lives you touch. He had become a changed man not because of the money he had earned, but because of the people he had helped and the world he was determined to build. That was a story of transformation, but it doesn't stop here. Remember, true success is measured not by what you accumulate, but by the lives you touch and the difference you make. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our community. Together, let's redefine what it means to live a truly successful life. See you in the next video.